Commitment 2024 coverage continues now with more analysis from Tuesday's historic presidential election. Joining me now in studio is the host of Matter of Fact right here on WISN every week, Soledad O'Brien. Thank you so much for being here.
It is my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course, so you have spent months traveling the country, talking with voters, hitting the swing states, including right here in Wisconsin. Was there anything that surprised you with Tuesday's election results, or are those results pretty in line with what voters were telling you?
Yeah, I think they're pretty in line. I mean, I think it talks a lot about sort of the America we're living in today. There's an article, I think it's Peter Baker in the New York Times who writes about that. But yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not shocked at all. I think what we really heard from the swing states and the things that I was interested in is sort of these different demographics. What do they identify with? What were the messaging and messages that worked for them? We did a documentary that looked at the Hispanic vote. What were the things that were appealing? Would Hispanics turn out in bigger numbers? And so, yeah, I think it was pretty consistent with what I expected.
What do you make of some of the exit polling data that we are starting to learn that shows that Trump's gain, specifically with Hispanic voters, with black voters, specifically men, really helped him in this win?
Yeah, no, not a surprise there. I think a lot of before the exit polling, a lot of the polling was showing that slide had been happening. And we know that certainly for Hispanic, Latino voters had already been shifting from Democrats to Republicans over the last probably 4 elections. But yeah, I think it was a pretty big shift. And I think it's something that Democrats certainly knew was a problem, was a risk. And I think a lot of the polling showed that that was likely to happen. I think it's the one thing I was surprised about was to see that the impact of some of the conversations, the rally in Madison Square Garden in New York City, seemed to have less of an impact than you might have thought if you followed social media.
What is the second Trump administration going to look like?
Listen, I thought the first Trump administration was pretty chaotic. So I think we could be teed up for a lot of chaos. It's been promised, right? People have talked about mass deportations. We know that people who support Donald Trump have talked about, maybe getting rid of vaccines and then backing away from that promise, or I don't know if that's considered a prize, not a promise, is that a threat? So I think it really is going to depend.
You are in season 10 of Matter of Fact. Congratulations, by the way. Outside of a presidential election year, which keeps us all busy, what are some other things that you guys are exploring on Matter of Fact?
Yeah, we're really excited for the upcoming year, 2025, because we're going to kick off a series that really looks at solutions. I think one way in which journalists can help think about bringing the country together, frankly, instead of having, politicians debate and fight on the air. We've always loved to look at stories that say, here are people that we should be thinking about and honoring and knowing what they're doing and who are focused on solutions wherever they are, frankly, on a political scale. It really is relevant to us. We just want to see who's working on things and is what they're doing working. We've got to look at the homeless people who are employed, the number of people who have jobs and who are houseless. We're really interested in seeing the data around that. And then I mentioned mass deportations. We're working on a story about what happened the last time the United States tried to tackle mass deportations. It happened in the 1930s.
Matter of Fact with Soledad O'Brien airs Sundays at 10:30 right here on WISN.